This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey everyone, it's Mark Bayer, and you are tuned to When Science Speaks. This episode of the show is sponsored by the free One for the Week email newsletter. One for the Week delivers one high-impact communication resource to inboxes every week that you can immediately apply to take your communication skills to the next level. Want one piece of communication and persuasion insight you can use right away to get your voice heard? Join the 800 subscribers of the One for the Week newsletter by going to whensciencespeaks.com/one for the week. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Jonah Berger to the show today. Jonah is a Wharton School professor and international best-selling author of Magic Words, Contagious Invisible Influence, and The Catalyst. He's a world-renowned expert on natural language processing, change, word-of-mouth influence, consumer behavior, and why things catch on. Jonah teaches one of the world's most popular online courses, and his work is often covered by leading media outlets, including the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, Wall Street Journal, many other publications as well. He's keynoted hundreds of major conferences and events like South by Southwest. Jonah advises various early-stage companies and also consults for organizations such as Apple, Google, Nike, and the Gates Foundation. Jonah earned his Ph.D. in marketing from Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Welcome to the show, Jonah. Wonderful to have you back.
Thanks so much for having me back.
So we had a chance to talk when you were on the show after the release of your previous book, which was The Catalyst, How to Change Anyone's Mind, which is a fantastic book that I recommend. And by the way, we'll have links to all of your books in the show notes that accompany this episode. I want to ask you how the focus of your latest book, which is Magic Words, and that's out next week on March the 7th, how this latest book relates to The Catalyst.
I started working on this book before I started working on The Catalyst. So for about the last 10 years or so, I've been doing research using natural language processing to extract insight from textual data. And what I realized is basically everything we do in some way, shape, or form involves language. We use language to write emails and put together PowerPoint presentations. We use language to write papers and articles. We use language to speak to clients and prospects. We use language to connect with loved ones. Even our own private thoughts rely on language. But while we spend a lot of time thinking about what we want to communicate, the things we want to say, we often spend a lot less time thinking about how to say them, or specific words we should use to communicate those ideas. And unfortunately, that's a big missed opportunity because subtle shifts in the way we say things can have a huge impact on our own success. Very nice research, for example, shows that adding just one word to a pitch can make people about 50% more likely to do what we've asked. My own work with colleagues has shown that rather than saying we liked something, saying we recommend it makes people about a third more likely to take our suggestion. And from the language of email to loan applications to basically every domain of life, we can learn a lot of things about people from the language they leave behind. Work on emails, for example, shows that we can predict whether someone's going to be promoted or fired based on how similar their language is to their colleagues. Work on loan applications shows that we can predict whether someone's going to default on a loan or pay it back on time based on the language they use in their application. And so whether we're trying to influence others or we're trying to gain insight into their behavior, by understanding the power of magic words and how to use them, we can increase our.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And I want to get right into this because oftentimes people think that the way to be persuasive and influential is to make pronouncements, declarative sentences, little room for doubt or disagreement. And you talk about that in Magic Words, about how you can convey confidence and how that can prompt people to listen or to take your recommendations, for example. And you also devote a chapter in Magic Words to asking the right questions. And many listeners are doing that all the time. They're asking questions about the latest science, the latest innovations, and so forth. I would love for you to, because many people don't ask for advice, for example, because maybe they don't want to be seen as not having the right answer. But you take that and you address that and kind of present information and research that can cause people to actually question whether that's true, whether they maybe should be asking for advice if it's done in the right way, as you describe in your book.
Yeah, so stepping back for a second, there are 6 key types of language I talk about in the book. And to help people remember them, put them in a framework. It's called the SPEAK framework. It's SPEACC, no K at the end. I wasn't clever enough to come up with a K. Apparently, it's the most difficult Scrabble letter, so I don't feel so badly about that. But the S stands for the language of similarity. The P is the language of posing questions. The E is the language of motion. A is for agency and identity. One of the C's is confidence, as you said, and one of the C's is concreteness. To answer your question, we often think I shouldn't ask for advice. Right? Not only will it bother someone, but they might not know the answer. And even worse, it'll make me look bad, make me look like I don't know what I'm talking about. And so, particularly if we're a scientist, if we're a researcher, particularly the more senior we get, the more we might say, I shouldn't ask for advice. But that's actually a missed opportunity, because not only don't we gain the insight of others by asking advice, asking for advice actually makes us look better, not worse. There's some very nice research done by folks at Harvard and Wharton, had people have interactions with others. Some of those others asked for advice, some didn't. And what they found is that when people asked for advice, other people saw them more favorably, saw them as smarter and more competent. And the reason why is actually pretty simple. Everyone thinks they have great advice. Everyone is egocentric, right? They think their own advice is great. And so when someone else comes along and asks them for advice, they go, wow, that person's really smart, because they were smart enough to ask me for my advice. And so asking for advice takes advantage of other people's egocentrism, right? It makes you look better because it makes them feel good about themselves.
Yeah, that is so interesting to me. And I want to actually follow that up a little bit, because in Magic Words, you explain the specific effective strategies actually for asking better questions that are really insightful. Could you share some of those insights here?
You just used an example of exactly what I talked about in the book. So you did it very masterfully. Questions are great. And I talked about questions a little bit in the Catalyst. And I've done some research on questions. I've also read a lot of other people's research on questions. And they're just such a powerful linguistic device, right? Sure, questions can allow us to collect information, but they do a lot. Right? As asking for advice shows, questions shape how other people see us, can shape the nature of a conversation or discussion by highlighting or spotlighting things. Questions can do a lot of different things. But certain types of questions work differently. And one particular type of questions that is quite valuable are called follow-up questions. And what do I mean by follow-up questions? Well, often in interactions, at the beginning of an action, someone will say, how are you? And someone else will say, great, how are you? That's a question. It's not really a question, right? It's more of a phatic social grooming. I'm polite, you're polite. Let's move on to the business of conversation. Now, there are other questions that are called reciprocal questions. What do you have for lunch? Oh, I'm having this. What are you having? Asking the same thing back may not be at the beginning of a conversation, but again, it just shows that you're polite. But follow-up questions actually have a quite useful impact. Some research looked at speed dating interactions or social interactions in workplace contexts, and they found that asking more follow-up questions made people liked. People asked more follow-up questions, were liked by others and perceived positively. And the reason why is that follow-up questions show that you care, want to learn more, right? If someone says, oh, I really enjoyed that meeting, you can say, oh, I did too. That doesn't show them that you care. If you say instead, oh, interesting, what did you like about it? That shows not only that you listened to them, that you paid attention, that you understood, but that you care enough to ask more. Similarly, if someone said, oh, I had a tough day at work, you can say, I'm sorry to hear that. Now, that does show you care, right? But an even better way to show you care might be, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What happened? Right? I care enough not just to say I care, but show you I care by opening up an opportunity for you to talk more. And so, whether in a personal or professional context, the right questions can be quite powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this context, I want to ask you, because many listeners, like I mentioned, are working in complex fields, a lot of technical language, and you address in Magic Words, I think, really well. Complicated language, abstract concepts, concreteness, which you mentioned earlier. I'd love for you to share your insights and research with listeners as it relates to using concrete language. And also, you point out there are times to be abstract as well.
Yeah. And for folks who are trying to be better communicators, there's a book called Made to Stick, which I love, that talks some about concreteness also. But we as communicators often use very abstract language, right? When we understand something really well, we talk in a way that we can understand, but not necessarily everybody else does. And this is often called the curse of knowledge. And it's a curse because we understand it, but it's a curse because we think everybody else is also going to understand it. So we talk a way that we get, but other people don't. And further, our tendency, if someone asks, did we understand something, to say, yeah, sure, when we really didn't understand something. And so We don't often learn that our audience didn't understand what we said. Concrete language is a great way to make things more understandable, memorable, and more action. What do I mean by concrete language? Table is very concrete. I can see it, I can touch it. That's something that is concrete. Strategy is very abstract. I can't see it, I can't touch it, I don't know what that means. Same with language. We studied hundreds of customer service calls, and we found that concrete language increases customer satisfaction because it makes people feel like you heard them. What do I mean by concrete language? If someone says, "Hey, I'm having trouble, my flight got delayed, can you rebook me from Chicago to DC?" Someone could say, "Sure, I'm happy to help with that." And that indicates that they're happy to help. But it's a very abstract level where if you said, "Sure, I'm happy to look into new flights from Chicago to DC," you're really showing them that you heard them. Same in a refund context. If you might say, "Oh, yeah, we'll get your money back soon," that's saying the money's coming back. But if I say your refund will be there tomorrow, tomorrow's much more concrete than the soon. And so by using concrete language, we can help make things easier to understand and help make people think we're listening and show them we're listening as well. I think what is challenging about writing a book like this is certain things are often good, but that doesn't mean they're always good. And so I try in each chapter to be very clear about this is the type of thing we're talking about. This is when it's good, but if there's some cases where the opposite is good, let's talk about that as well. And there's some research that's looked at startup funding. So entrepreneurs pitching their startup and whether they get funded. And they find that in that context, abstract language is actually better. You would say, "But hold on, didn't you just say that concrete language shows you're listening, that concrete language helps people understand what you're doing?" But the truth is that when you're raising money for a startup, yeah, you want people to understand what you're doing. But what you really want them to do is think your idea, even if they don't understand it, but they think it has huge potential, they're much more likely to give you a lot of money to fund it. And so what this research finds is that abstract language is helpful because it makes people think that the idea has more possibility. If Uber is something that helps you to get a ride from your house to the office, I have a very concrete sense of what Uber does. It doesn't seem like that valuable of a company. Because if I say Uber's a transportation solution, I don't know exactly what they do, but let me tell you, it seems like they cover a broad area of things. And so when fundraising, it actually is better in some cases to talk about something a little more abstractly, higher level, because it makes people think that there's more possibility there. And so it's more worth giving a larger amount of money.
Yeah, it's so interesting. As we wrap up, Jonah, I want to ask you about a communication device that we're often told to use, storytelling, all the benefits of it that folks are familiar with. But there's often not a lot of guidance about what makes a powerful story,
Yeah.
how to develop it, how to
Yeah.
deliver it. And you really delve into this issue. Would love for you to share your insights.
Oh, sure. I am not a great storyteller. I have people in my own personal life who are great storytellers, and I'm learning to get better. But it's something I've thought a little bit about. In my first book, Contagious, talk a lot about the power of stories to carry ideas and almost using stories as flight simulators rather than saying something is true, using a story to illustrate that point. So you think about if you have kids and you tell the story of the boy who cried wolf, they're much more likely to listen to you. They pay attention to the story, but along the way, they learn that lying is a bad idea. And so stories can be vessels or carriers of information. But in more recent research, and as I talk about in Magic Words, we looked at what makes stories more engaging, right? What makes some movies or books more successful, television shows more successful. And what we found is that often, as leaders, as communicators, we want to make everything seem wonderful, right? Maybe you just got hired to an organization as a leader and you come in and you want to show, "I'm great. Let me tell you about all the reasons that I'm great." But on the one hand, while that might make you seem great, it also doesn't help other people connect with you because for most of us, our life isn't an ongoing highlight reel, right? You look on social media, sometimes it seems like everyone's life is wonderful. You look at your own life, you say, "My life isn't that way. I have highs and I also have lows." It turns out that talking about those lows actually makes the highs effective. To use an analogy, the view from the top of a mountain is beautiful, but if you walked all the way up, the view is even more rewarding than if you got dropped off by helicopter because you did the work, you made the change to get there. And so, what we find in stories is it's actually better to showcase some of your failures because it makes the successes even more interesting, even more impactful. There's a podcast I listen to sometimes called How I Built This by a guy named Guy Raz. He does a great job of pulling this out of anyone he talks to. You talk to successful leaders, they have a tendency to be like, "And then this great thing happened, and this great thing happened, and this great thing happened." But if instead You talk about some of the problems that they had. Oh, it looked like things were going to be good, but then I didn't get into the college I wanted to. Where I got this great job, but then I got fired. Or I raised some money, but the first prototype didn't work. Suddenly now, when the story gets to the prototype working, it's even more impactful because you saw the journey of how they got there and you think it's more relatable for yourself, right? Because you go, well, I could do that. I think about good stories as roller coasters. They've got to have lots of ups and downs. And it's not bad to reveal some of your failures, your problems. It can help other people connect with you, not only because it makes the story better, because it helps them relate.
Just amazing advice, actionable, specific, and abstract at times, which is a great combination. I know it's going to be so useful for our listeners. Dr. Jonah Berger, wonderful again to have you back. Your latest book, Magic Words, is out on Tuesday, March 7th. It's part of the Berger Pantheon of books, and they'll all be linked to in the show notes that accompany this episode. Thanks for making time to come onto the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
Listeners, thank you for being with us on this episode of When Science Speaks, and I hope you will be back next time for the next episode of When Science Speaks.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to click subscribe. Check us out on the web at whensciencespeaks.com, and we'll see you next time.